Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are going to talk about something that is hiding in plain sight. It's a system that pretty much every single person listening to this has interacted with if they've ever looked for a place to live, but almost nobody actually knows how the machine works.
That's so true.
We are talking about the real estate market.
It's deceptive, isn't it? You open an app, you see a house, you see a price, and you just assume, okay, this is just how the world works. It feels like a public utility, like water coming out of a tap.
Right. You assume there's this giant cloud of data out there, freely available, just waiting for you to browse it. But the reality is so much weirder and more territorial than that.
Exactly.
We're talking about the invisible engine that powers the entire residential real estate industry. We are talking about the MLS.
The multiple listing service. And I'm glad you used the word territorial right off the bat, because that is the defining characteristic of this whole story.
Oh, really?
Yeah. This isn't really a story about software or databases. It's a story about a 100-year-old turf war, a social contract between bitter competitors, and a cartel-like structure that keeps the whole industry moving.
Cartel-like structure. Okay, we are definitely going to have to unpack that. But let's start with the biggest misconception I had before we started digging into the research for this.
I think I know where you're going.
I always assumed the MLS was a single thing,
Yeah.
there's a master server in a government basement somewhere, maybe next to the alien bodies, that lists every house for sale in America.
That is what everyone thinks, but it's completely 100% wrong. There is no such thing as the MLS. It just doesn't exist.
Okay, so then what am I looking at when I go on Zillow or Redfin? What is that information?
You're looking at an aggregation of data. It's pulled from hundreds of tiny independent fiefdoms. In the United States alone, as of the last major count back in 2020, there were roughly 580 different individual multiple listing services.
580, that seems incredibly inefficient. Why do we need 580 different databases just to sell houses?
Because real estate is hyperlocal. It's
Yeah.
always been hyperlocal. And historically, the people who controlled the data didn't want to share it with the town over, let alone the state over.
So who owns them?
They're all owned by different entities. Some are owned by local associations of realtors. Some are regional conglomerates that have merged a few smaller ones. And some are just independent cooperatives. But each one has its own rules, its own fees, its own leadership, and its own territory.
So it's a patchwork quilt.
A very expensive, legally complex patchwork quilt. And our mission today is to figure out why it was built this way, and more importantly, whether it's actually good for you, the consumer, or if it's just good for the brokers.
Okay, so that's the plan. We're going to cover the mechanics of how this social contract actually works, then get into the massive antitrust battles where the government literally had to step in and say, play nice.
Well, the lawsuits are the best part.
And then, this is the part I'm really excited for, we are going to do a global tour. Because apparently this whole system we have in the U.S. is a total anomaly.
It is almost entirely unique to North America. If you try to explain the U.S. MLS system to a real estate agent in London or, Hanoi, they look at you like you're speaking Martian. It makes no sense to them.
Okay, so if you're listening and you think you know how buying a house works, get ready to have that completely dismantled. Let's start at the foundational level. What is an MLS, really? If I strip away the computer screens, the apps, all of it, what is the core definition?
At its most fundamental level, an MLS is a facility. It's an organization that provides a suite of services to brokers. But the definition that really matters, the legal heartbeat of the whole thing, is that it is a facility to establish contractual offers of cooperation and compensation.
Okay, those are big words. Cooperation and compensation. Let's break that down, because usually when I think of competitors like Coke and Pepsi or Ford and GM, they don't cooperate.
They try to destroy each other?
Exactly. So why would competing real estate brokers cooperate?
Because of the nature of the product. Let's role play this for a second. Imagine it's 1890. You're a broker. You have a listing, a nice farmhouse on the edge of town. I'm a broker across town, and I happen to have a buyer who's looking for a farmhouse. If I call you up and say, hey, I have a buyer for your listing, what is your immediate fear?
My fear is that you're going to steal my client, or you're going to go directly to my seller and try to cut me out of the deal entirely.
Precisely. Or, even if I'm on the level and I bring the buyer and we close the deal, you might just stiff me on the commission. You might say, thanks for the buyer, see ya, and keep all the money for yourself. There's no trust.
So it's a classic prisoner's dilemma. If we don't trust each other, the deal doesn't happen and nobody gets paid.
And that is the problem that the MLS solves. It is, at its core, an insurance policy against greed and mistrust. It establishes what's called a unilateral offer of compensation.
Unilateral meaning what? It goes one way.
It means is a blanket offer to the entire network. When a listing broker puts a property into the MLS, they are legally binding themselves. They are typing into the system, I am offering X% or X dollars to any cooperating broker in this MLS who brings a buyer that successfully closes.
Ah, so it's not a negotiation.
It's not a request. It's a promise. It's written into the rules of the organization.
So that removes all the friction. I, as the buyer's broker, don't have to call you and haggle over my fee before I show the house to my client. I just look it up in the database, I see the offer right there, and I know that if my buyer buys it, I'm safe, I'm getting paid.
Right. It creates liquidity in the market. Without that preset guaranteed offer, every single home showing would require a separate contract negotiation between the agents. The gears of the market would grind to a halt. It would be impassable.
But hold on, I have to play devil's advocate here. This sounds fantastic for the agents, making sure they all get paid. But doesn't this blanket offer system basically lead to price fixing?
It is the billion-dollar question.
If every listing in the MLS says offering 2.5% or offering 3%, aren't we just removing the ability for the consumer to negotiate? It becomes the standard price.
And that's the argument that has been at the center of decades of lawsuits from the Department of Justice. Now, if you ask the National Association of Realtors, NAR, they will tell you explicitly in all of their official documents, commissions are negotiable at any time.
At any time. But what's the reality in practice?
In practice, it feels very, very sticky. Many agents feel that once it's in the MLS, it's set in stone. But technically, the MLS is just the vehicle for the offer. The initial negotiation happens between the listing broker and the seller. They agree on a total commission, let's say 6%. Then the broker decides how much of that to offer to the buyer's side. The MLS just makes that offer transparent to all the other professionals in the market.
Okay, so that's the money side. That's the compensation. Let's talk about the other part, the information itself, because I think most people believe the value of the MLS is the photos. Look at this kitchen, look at this backyard.
The photos are just the fluff. They're the marketing. The real deep value is the structured data. We're talking about hundreds of specific fields that define a property. And this isn't just 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. This is deeply local, proprietary knowledge.
Give me an example of how local we're talking. What kind of data field would exist in one MLS but not another?
Okay, perfect example. If you're in Phoenix, Arizona, the MLS data fields regarding air conditioning systems, what type of refrigerant they use, the age of the unit, and the details on any swamp coolers are incredibly specific and detailed, because that's life or death there.
Right, that's critical information.
But if you're in, say, rural Vermont, nobody cares about that. The critical fields there are about the type of heating oil tank, the condition of the septic leach field, whether there's a wood stove, and if it's permitted. A generic national database can't possibly handle that level of local nuance. These fields were determined by local professionals over decades of selling homes in that specific area.
And who owns all that granular data? Because when I see it on Zillow, it feels public. It feels like I own it, or at least the public owns it.
And that is the great illusion. You do not own it. Zillow does not own it. The data belongs, unequivocally, to the broker who signed the listing agreement with the seller. It is their proprietary intellectual property.
So when we're browsing listings, we are just looking through a keyhole that they've allowed us to look through.
Exactly. The brokers have collectively decided it is in our best financial interest to let the public see some of this because it helps us find buyers and sell the house. But they control the keyhole. They can make it bigger, they can make it smaller, and in the old days, they tried to keep it closed entirely.
It's a bit unnerving to realize that the information we rely on for what is usually the biggest purchase of our entire lives is actually held in a private vault, and we're only ever seeing the marketing brochure version of it.
And for a long time, the different vaults couldn't even talk to each other. I mean, it was a complete mess.
Yeah.
We should probably mention the Real Estate Standards Organization, or RESO.
RESO. Sounds like a villain organization from a Marvel movie. We meet again, RESO.
It does, right. But they're actually the peacekeepers in this whole story. Because when you have 580 different MLSs, you had 580 different ways of saying master bedroom. One called it MBR, another master BR, another primary suite. It was chaos.
So a computer couldn't understand it.
A computer couldn't search across different systems. RESO came in and created the data dictionary. They forced everyone to speak the same language. They standardized the terms. This field is how you describe a half bath, period.
So they created a universal translator for houses.
Exactly.
Mm.
They also created the Web API, which is the modern transport system for the data. The old standard was called RES, which is now deprecated. Without RESO's work, the apps we use on our phones today simply wouldn't function. You'd look for a 3-bedroom house and get results for 3-car garages because the codes didn't match.
Okay, so we have this system that is fragmented, proprietary, controlled by local interests, and held together by a complicated promise to split the money. How on earth did we get here? Because this doesn't sound like a system anyone would design from scratch in 2024.
No, you would never, ever design it this way today. It's a complete historical accident. To understand the MLS, you have to go all the way back to the late 1800s.
The horse and buggy days.
Literally. Picture a small town in, say, 1890. There are no phones, no internet, no cars. If you are a real estate broker with a house to sell, how do you let other brokers know about it? How do you know what they have for sale?
I guess I'd have to walk around, talk to people at the general store, maybe put a notice up on a town bulletin board.
Or you'd go to the office of the local real estate association. The brokers would physically gather, sometimes daily, sometimes once a week, for what they called a listing exchange.
Like a town hall meeting for houses?
Pretty much. And they would physically exchange information, often on handwritten index cards.
Yeah.
I have a colonial on Main Street, price is $4,000. Okay, great. I have a small cottage on the edge of town, needs some work. They'd stand up and announce their inventory.
And this is where that social contract was born. In that room.
This is the very moment. It was a handshake deal. The philosophy was incredibly simple. Help me sell my inventory, and I will help you sell yours. It was a revolutionary concept for the time. Instead of hoarding information, which was the natural instinct, they created a system to share it. But, and this is the most important part, they agreed to share it only with each other.
That distinction is absolutely key. Only with each other. It was a club, a closed loop.
It was a gated community for professionals. And that's actually why the name is so generic, multiple listing service. It wasn't a brand name. It was just a simple description of what they were doing. They were listing multiple properties together in one service.
And that's why you can't trademark MLS in the US, right? I read that in the research. It's like trying to trademark the words grocery store.
Correct. The term has been deemed generic by the courts. Anyone can technically start something and call it an MLS. But to make it work, you need the listings, you need the inventory, and the inventory has always been controlled by the established brokers.
Okay, this brings us to the juicy part, the fights. Because whenever you have a powerful club that controls access to a lucrative market, eventually someone is going to get locked out, and they are not going to be happy about it.
The modern history of the MLS is written in lawsuits. It's a constant tug-of-war between the gatekeepers, the traditional brokers, and anyone at all trying to disrupt their model.
Let's start with the discount controversy, because this seems to be the biggest and most direct threat to the traditional 6% commission model that everyone knows.
It is. The traditional model relies on everyone sort of playing by the same general rules. But what happens when a new type of broker comes along and says, hey, I'll list your house for a flat fee of $500. I'll put it in the MLS, I'll handle the paperwork, but I'm not doing open houses, I'm not baking cookies, and I won't hold your hand through the process.
That's the no-frills airline model of real estate. You get a seat, but you pay extra for bags and a drink.
Exactly. And the traditional brokers hated this. They absolutely despised it. They felt it devalued their profession and their service. So in some MLSs, they tried to block these listings.
Block them how? Like literally just say, no, you can't put that in our database.
Or even worse, let them in but then hide them.
Yeah.
We have to look at the case of RealComp. This was a big MLS in Michigan, and it became a landmark case.
Okay, so what did RealComp do specifically?
This was in the mid-2000s, when discounters were really starting to gain traction. RealComp's board, which was made up of traditional brokers, decided they didn't want to support this business model. So they created a set of rules that said, effectively, if you are a limited service or flat fee broker, we will accept your listing into our system, but we won't send it out to the big public websites, and we might not even show up by default to the other agents in their main search.
Wow, so they were basically shadow banning the competition. They were saying, you can join our club, but you have to sit in the corner with a bag over your head.
That's a perfect way to put it. And they argued they had a right to do it. Their argument was, this is our system, we built it, we paid for it. Why should we be forced to use our infrastructure to help a competitor who is actively undercutting our prices and threatening our livelihood?
I mean, I have to admit, from a purely business perspective, I kind of see their point. If I built the only railroad into town, why should I be forced to let the guy offering half-price tickets use my tracks?
That is the free rider argument. It's a powerful one. But the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, saw it very differently. They saw it as a classic antitrust violation.
What was the FTC's argument?
The FTC's position was simple. You, RealComp, have a monopoly on the data. The MLS is the only game in town. By hiding these discount listings, you are directly harming the consumer. You are preventing them from seeing a cheaper option, and you are artificially keeping commission rates high by colluding to suppress a new, more affordable business model.
So it went to court.
It did. And unlike many other MLSs who just settled with the FTC, RealComp fought hard. They took it all the way. And interestingly, they actually won the initial trial in 2007. The judge sided with them.
But that wasn't the end of it.
Not even close. The FTC appealed. And in 2009, a higher court delivered a unanimous 4-0 ruling, completely overturning the initial verdict and ruling against RealComp.
And what did that ruling establish? What was the precedent?
The precedent was huge. It established that an MLS cannot discriminate against a member based on their business model or the commission they charge. If you meet the qualifications to be a member, you get full access, and your listings get full exposure. The government effectively said you cannot use the MLS as a weapon to punish discounters.
But that wasn't the only war being fought at the time. There was an even bigger one, right? The war over the internet itself.
Right.
I remember when the first real estate websites started popping up, places like HomeGain, and the traditional agents were absolutely freaking out.
This was the battle of the virtual office website, or VOW. And we need to be really careful with our terms here because there's a critical difference between a simple advertising website and what a VOW is trying to be.
Okay, so walk me through that. What's the difference between what Zillow does today and what a VOW was back then?
Zillow, for the most part, is an advertising portal. It syndicates data, it shows you a picture of a house and says, this is the listing agent, call this person. A VOW was a much more radical idea. A VOW was an attempt to take the entire brokerage office and put it online.
How so?
They wanted to give you, the consumer, a login. Once you logged in and registered as a client, their goal was to show you everything the agent could see. Not just the public-facing stuff. We're talking sold prices, days on market, price change history, agent-only remarks.
The secret data, the stuff behind the curtain.
Exactly. And the traditional brokers looked at that and said, absolutely not, no way. They saw it as giving away the crown jewels. So the National Association of Realtors passed a series of rules that allowed brokers to opt out of sharing their data with these specific virtual companies.
So they could say, I'll share my listing with the brick and mortar office down the street, but I will not share it with that website.
Right. And their argument was that these VOWs weren't really brokerages. They were just data scrapers. They were tech companies who would just solicit clients online and then refer them out to local agents for a huge 25–35% cut of the commission without doing any of the actual local work.
So the Department of Justice got involved again.
Yeah. The DOJ sued NAR in 2005 over this.
But again, let me play devil's advocate for a second. The traditional broker did the work. They met the seller, they got the listing agreement, they took the photos, they measured the rooms. Why should a tech company get to just scrape all that valuable data for free and build a national business on top of it? Isn't that kind of parasitic?
That was NAR's exact argument. They said, this is our copyrighted data, our intellectual property. These websites are just profiting off our labor. But the DOJ's comeback was, you are using your collective market power to stifle innovation. You are scared that the internet is going to make your business model obsolete, so you are colluding to break the internet.
It's the Luddites smashing the looms all over again.
In a legal sense, yes. The DOJ argued it was a group boycott that illegally restricted competition. The case dragged on for years, a real battle of titans. Finally, in May of 2008, they reached a settlement.
And what was the outcome of that settlement?
NAR agreed to get rid of the opt-out rule. The settlement mandated that internet brokerages had to get access to the same listings as traditional ones. They couldn't be discriminated against just because their office was a website.
And that settlement essentially created the world we live in today, where we can sit on our couch at 2 a.m. and scroll through not just active listings, but sold listings from 6 months ago.
It broke the dam. It was the moment the industry was forced, kicking and screaming, into the digital age. It fundamentally changed how consumers access real estate data forever.
Now, before we leave these legal battles, we have to look slightly north, because you mentioned earlier that the U.S. and Canada are different. Canada has an MLS too, but it operates under a different structure.
They do, but it's a much more centralized and branded system. In the U.S., as we said, MLS is a generic term. In Canada, both MLS and Realtor are registered trademarks. They're owned by one entity,
Hmm.
the Canadian Real Estate Association, or CREA.
So they actually own the words themselves. That's an incredibly powerful position to be in.
It's immense. It gives them a level of control that NAR in the U.S. can only dream of. And, unsurprisingly, they had their own version of the antitrust fight against discounters. There was a company in Ontario called Realty Sellers,
Let me guess. Another flat fee discounter.
a huge one. And they were trying to offer a very basic flat fee listing service. And they ran into roadblock after roadblock from the establishment boards. Eventually, the pressure was so intense that they shut down their operations. But then, they went nuclear.
What'd they do?
They sued CREA and the Toronto Real Estate Board for $100 million.
Wow.
They essentially alleged, you conspired to change the rules specifically to put our business model out of commission. And just like in the U.S., the federal regulators, in this case, Canada's Competition Bureau, stepped in. In 2010, they forced a settlement that opened the door for flat fee listings on the Canadian MLS.
But I heard that even after the settlement, some Canadian boards still tried to find loopholes to resist.
Oh, always. The resistance is creative. Some boards argued, well, provincial licensing law says a broker has to actively manage a listing and provide a certain level of service. If you just post it on the MLS and walk away, you aren't fulfilling your duties as a broker, so we can kick you out on those grounds. It was a way of trying to use provincial rules to get around the federal competition settlement.
It really feels like the industry is just constantly trying to find new ways to justify its existence and its fee structure in the face of technology that relentlessly wants to make things cheaper and more efficient.
That is the eternal struggle of this industry. It's full service versus maximum efficiency, and they are always at odds.
Speaking of struggles and doing things differently, let's talk about the one place in the U.S. that seems to be completely immune to all of this. New York City.
Manhattan.
Ah.
The island that plays by its own rules in everything, including real estate.
I was absolutely shocked to learn this during our research. Manhattan, arguably the most famous and valuable real estate market on the entire planet, does not use the traditional MLS. How is that possible?
It just never took hold there. You have to understand the culture of Manhattan real estate.
Yeah.
It is fierce. It is shark-infested waters. For decades, the big brokerages, the Corcorans, the Douglas Ellimans, the Brown Harris Stevens of the world, were titans.
And they didn't want to cooperate.
Their thinking for a long time was, we have enough inventory on our own, we have the best listings, why should we share our valuable information with the little guys and make it easier for them to compete with us? But eventually, even they realized they needed some kind of system for co-broking. So they built their own. It's called the RLS.
The REBNY listing service.
Exactly. Operated by the Real Estate Board of New York, or RBNY. And RBNY is a fascinating organization because they actually seceded from the National Association of Realtors way back in 1994. They basically said, we don't need your rules. We're New York.
That is the most New York thing I have ever done in my life. We're seceding from the realtors.
It really is. And their system has a hilarious backstory regarding its name. Back in the early days of digital, they tried to launch an online exchange called ROLEX.
Rolex, like the luxury watch.
ROLEX. It stood for RBNY Online Listing Exchange.
I'm going to go out on a limb and assume the Swiss watchmakers didn't love that.
They definitely did not. They slapped REBNY with a trademark infringement claim so fast it would make your head spin, so they had to change it. But it just shows you the mindset. They viewed their exclusive listings as luxury goods, like a high-end watch.
So is the system actually different today? If I'm a buyer looking for an apartment in Manhattan, is the experience better or worse because they use the RLS instead of an MLS?
It's different. One key difference is speed. The RLS has a very strict 24-hour rule. If you, as a broker, get an exclusive listing agreement signed, it must be entered and disseminated through the system to all other members within 24 hours.
And what's the reason for that rush?
Because in a market as fast as Manhattan, information is everything. In the old days, it used to be a 72-hour rule, which agencies without weekend staff complained about. But before that, agencies would get a hot new listing on a Friday and hold it as a pocket listing over the weekend. They'd try to sell it internally to their own buyers first to get both sides of the commission before sharing it with the rest of the market on Monday.
Double-ending the deal.
Exactly. The RLS cracked down on that. They want immediate, fair dissemination to the entire brokerage community. So in that sense, it's actually a very pro-cooperation rule.
Okay, so we've established that North America is completely obsessed with this cooperation and compensation model. We have this elaborate, legally defended system to force competitors to work together. But this is where the story gets really wild. Because if you leave this continent, the concept of the MLS basically disappears.
It completely vanishes.
Oh.
And this is what is so hard for Americans and Canadians to wrap their heads around. In most of the world, there is no unilateral offer of compensation. The whole foundation of our system doesn't exist.
So let's go on this global tour. Let's start with the United Kingdom. They speak the same language, they have a similar legal system. Surely they sell houses the same way we do.
Not at all. In fact, the UK serves as a powerful cautionary tale of what happens when you don't have an MLS. They went through a period in the late 1990s that people in the industry there actually refer to as the dark years.
The dark years. That sounds ominous. Paint the picture for me. I'm a potential buyer in London in 1999. It's raining, obviously. I want to buy a flat. What do I do?
You put on your raincoat and you walk down to the high street. You go into an estate agent's office, let's call him Agent Smith. You look at the photos of listings taped to his window. You go inside and ask, do you have anything with 2 bedrooms near the tube station? He shows you the 3 listings his office has. None of them are quite right.
Okay, so I ask him, what about that other agency I see across the street? Agent Jones. Do you know what they have?
And Agent Smith says, I have absolutely no idea what Agent Jones has, and I certainly can't show it to you because if you bought it, he wouldn't pay me a penny. There's no co-broking agreement.
So I have to thank him, leave, go back out into the rain, cross the street, and walk into Agent Jones's office and start the whole process over again.
Exactly. And you have to register with him, give him your name and number, and then you go to the next one and the next one. As a buyer, you might have to register with 10 different agencies just to get a view of the available inventory in one single neighborhood.
That sounds miserable. It's incredibly inefficient for the consumer.
It was total fragmentation. The market liquidity was terrible, deals fell apart. But then technology came along and solved the problem that the brokers themselves refused to solve.
The internet.
Specifically, what we call vertical portals. In the UK, this means 2 giants, Rightmove and Zoopla.
So how is a portal like Rightmove different from an MLS?
It's a fundamental difference in structure. In the US, the MLS is a horizontal network. It's broker-to-broker cooperation. In the UK, the portals completely replaced that. Every Agent Smith and Agent Jones decided it was in their best interest to upload their own listings directly to Rightmove.
So Rightmove becomes the central marketplace, not some private broker network.
Correct. The agents are not cooperating with each other. They are competing with each other on the portal. If you, the buyer, find a house on Rightmove that's listed by Agent Jones, you call Agent Jones directly. You don't call your own buyer's agent and have them set up the showing.
So that means the role of the dedicated buyer's agent, that person whose whole job is to represent you, drive you around, and protect your interests, that doesn't really exist in the UK?
It's extremely rare. It's a very niche service. In the UK system, you're almost always dealing directly with the seller's agent, which means, and this is a key consumer protection point, the person showing you the house and negotiating with you is legally and financially working for the seller, not for you.
That is a massive difference. In the US, we're told we pay a commission of, say, 5–6% in part to have professional representation on both sides of the transaction. In the UK, they pay much less, usually only 1% to 2% total, but the buyer is essentially on their own, navigating against a professional.
That is the fundamental trade-off. Lower transaction fees, but much less advocacy and support for the buyer.
Fascinating. Let's jump over to the Czech Republic. You mentioned in the notes that this is a case study in economic surplus and how it affects the market structure.
Yes, the Czech Republic is a perfect example of how local market conditions completely dictate the system. There is no MLS there. And when you ask why, the answer is simple. Demand is so high and supply is so tight that they don't need one.
Explain that connection. Why does high demand mean no MLS?
Okay, imagine you're an agent and you list a desirable flat in the center of Prague. In the current market, you might have 10 qualified buyers lining up at the door within an hour of it going live.
Okay, that's a good problem to have as a seller's agent.
It's a best problem. So if you are that listing agent, why on earth would you agree to split your commission with another agent who brings you one of those 10 buyers? You don't need their help finding a buyer. The buyers are already finding you.
So the whole cooperation model, the foundation of the MLS, only makes sense if selling is hard and you need to maximize your reach.
Exactly. The MLS is a tool for balanced or difficult markets. In a high-demand, low-surplus market like the one in the Czech Republic, agents hoard their listings. They want to sell them alone and keep 100% of the fee. The economic incentive to share simply is not there.
So in that case, the invisible engine isn't a cooperative database, it's just raw, overwhelming demand.
Precisely. The market dynamics make cooperation unnecessary.
What about Vietnam? The notes mention something called open agency. This sounds completely chaotic.
It is the Wild West of real estate. In the U.S., the standard is an exclusive right to sell agreement. You, the seller, sign a contract with one agent for a set period of time. In Vietnam, they often use what's called an open agency, or non-exclusive listing.
Meaning I, as a homeowner, can hire 5 different agents at the same time to sell my one house.
Yes. And it's not uncommon to drive down a street in Ho Chi Minh City and see one house with 5 different for sale signs on the front lawn, all from different companies, sometimes even listed at slightly different prices.
That sounds like an absolute nightmare. Who gets the commission when it sells?
The one who crosses the finish line first? It is a straight-up race. Whichever agent brings the buyer who closes the deal gets paid. The other 4 get nothing.
That creates a terrible incentive structure, doesn't it? If I'm one of those 5 agents, I'm not going to spend any real money marketing your house if there's a 4 in 5 chance I'll get 0 return. I'm just going to try to flip it as fast as humanly possible with minimal effort.
Exactly. It leads to very low-quality service. It's all about quantity over quality. They did try to build an MLS in Vietnam starting in 2010, based on the U.S. model, to try to fix this and bring some order to the chaos. But it's an enormous struggle to change a market culture that is so deeply ingrained.
It seems like the common theme here is that you can't just install software and expect it to change how people do business. You have to change the psychology of the agents.
Culture eats strategy for breakfast, and that is especially true in real estate.
Speaking of culture shock, let's talk about Latin America, Mexico, and Costa Rica. The research we have here describes this as the gringo effect.
It's a very real phenomenon. Think about the big resort and expatriate towns, Cabo San Lucas, Puerto Vallarta, San Miguel de Allende. Who is the primary buyer of high-end real estate there?
Americans and Canadians, mostly.
And what do Americans and Canadians expect when they go to buy real estate? They expect an MLS. They arrive, and they say to a local agent, okay, show me everything on the market. And the local agents, historically, had no centralized way to do that.
So they built MLS systems just to appease the foreign buyers.
Essentially, yes. The very first MLS systems in Mexico were started in the late 1980s, specifically in these expatriate enclaves. It was a completely imported structure. American brokers down there essentially copy-pasted the U.S. model, the rules, the code of ethics, the lock boxes, the offer of compensation into Mexico to make the American and Canadian buyers feel comfortable and secure.
It's like bringing your own electrical adapters on vacation. We are going to bring our own entire real estate system with us.
But here's the catch. It often only exists in those pockets. For example, MLS BCS serves Baja California Sur, where Cabo is. It's a corporation owned by the brokers.
Yeah.
But if you go to the interior of Mexico or to a place like Costa Rica, it's often right back to the Wild West.
And the notes say that Costa Rica has no licensing for agents at all.
That's right. In Costa Rica, you do not need a license to call yourself a real estate agent. You, me, the listener, we could land in San Jose tomorrow, print up some business cards, and start selling multi-million-dollar properties. There's no educational requirement, no test, no oversight.
That is genuinely terrifying.
It is buyer beware on steroids. There is a small professional association, CRGR, the Costa Rica Global Association of Realtors, that tries to run a proper MLS and enforce a code of ethics. But as of a few years ago, they only had about 120 members. They are a tiny island of order in a vast sea of chaos.
So we've seen the U.S. cooperative cartel model, the U.K. portal model, a check hoarding model, and the Latin American imported model. It really makes you realize that the way we do things isn't the only way, or even the default way.
It is just one evolutionary path the market took, and it's not necessarily the fittest one to survive the next century.
That leads us perfectly to the present day and the future. We have the internet, we have Zillow, we have Redfin, we have AI that can write contracts. Does the 19th century handshake model still make sense in this environment?
Let's look at the modern interface that consumers actually see. We mentioned IDX Internet Data Exchange. That is the policy, the set of rules that allows brokers to show the MLS data on their own websites, which then gets syndicated out to the big portals.
And what's the limitation there for the consumer?
The limitation is that if you find a house you love on Zillow, you can't click a Buy Now button. It's not Amazon. You still have to inject a human agent into the process to get through the door. The system is designed intentionally to keep the agent as the indispensable gatekeeper.
But for how long can that last? I mean, we are seeing AI that can analyze property values better than many humans. We're seeing virtual tours where I can walk through a house in stunning 3D without ever leaving my couch. The traditional roles are being eroded.
That is the core tension. The entire MLS structure was built for a world of information scarcity. The agent's value was, I have the data in my secret book and you don't, so you have to pay me for access. We now live in a world of near total information abundance.
So the value proposition of the broker just based on access is collapsing.
The value of access is collapsing to zero. The value of advice and negotiation might still be there. But the big question is, does that advice cost 6% of the home's value? That is what the market and the government is challenging right now.
And we are seeing consolidation as a response, right? Those 580 MLSs are shrinking in number.
Yes, finally. They are merging at a rapid pace. You now have giants like CRMLS in California, which has over 110,000 members. They are realizing that maintaining 500 little servers and 500 different CEOs is colossally stupid and inefficient. They need to scale up to have the resources and technological clout to compete with the portals.
Because if they don't band together, Zillow will just eat them for lunch.
Zillow, or CoStar, which is an even bigger commercial real estate data giant, or a tech company we haven't even seen yet. If the MLS doesn't evolve from a bunch of small local clubs into a modern, efficient data utility, then the portal model, the UK model, might just win by default. Consumers will just go where the data is easiest to use.
That is a pretty sobering thought for the entire industry.
It is. The invisible engine is old, it's a bit rusty, and it feels like the mechanics, the brokers, are all standing around fighting over who gets to hold the wrench while the car is driving itself toward a cliff.
That is a very vivid image. Okay, let's try to wrap this up. We've gone incredibly deep. We've covered a century of history, massive lawsuits, and global economics. What is the one thing you want the listener to take away from this entire deep dive?
I want them to understand that the price of housing isn't just about bricks and mortar and land. It's about the friction in the system. When you look at a home price and the closing costs, you are paying for the house, but you are also paying for the mechanism that was built to sell it.
You're paying the VIG.
You're paying the VIG, the cartel fee, the cooperation insurance policy, whatever you want to call it. The way we choose to organize the data directly determines the cost and speed of the transaction. The UK model is cheaper, but riskier for buyers. The US model is more expensive, but offers more representation. Neither's perfect.
So next time you drive past a for sale sign, remember, you aren't just looking at a house. You are looking at a single node in a massive, proprietary, fiercely defended, litigious network that is desperately trying to hold on to its power in a world that's becoming more digital by the second.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And with that, here's a final provocative thought for you to chew on. We saw two extremes today. In the Czech Republic, agents don't share data because high demand makes it unnecessary. In the US, agents created a system to share data because they wanted to guarantee their commission. But what if a future technology, maybe AI, can instantly and perfectly match an ideal buyer to their ideal seller with zero friction and handle all the paperwork? In that world, do you need the commission or the sharing? Do you need the agent at all?
Or do you just need a server that sends a notification? Match found. Sign here.
The Tinder of real estate.
It's a terrifying and maybe brilliant thought.
On that note, thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.